From Westminster in London, this is The Standard Podcast. I'm political editor Nicholas Cecil.
I'm deputy political editor Jitendra Joshi.
And I'm chief political correspondent Rachael Burford. And welcome back to A Week's a Long Time in Westminster.
And on today's show, we're split in two. So first of all, we've got Keir Starmer trying to unite Britain, Europe and the wider world.
We are facing up to the huge problems beyond our shores, because these problems echo at home. The effects play out on our streets. And in a dangerous world, we serve no one and solve nothing by turning inward.
Then over to America. Is it West Wing or West Wing for Joe Biden?
I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, but I think she was not qualified to be president. So let's start there. Now I want to hand it over to the president of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. President Putin. He's going to beat President Putin. President Zelensky.
But first, we've got the great IT crash, which hit on Friday morning, causing chaos around the world. Trains, planes, GPs, hospitals, banks and supermarkets have all been affected by a single faulty update.
I'm told it's a Microsoft problem with the software update. So assuming that's even outside the airport's control. So just got to grin and bear it, really.
And it came very much out of the blue, and it's very much an early lesson for Sir Keir Starmer and how government can really be dictated to by events. You can plan for as many choreographed meetings and speeches as you want, and then suddenly something hits and you've got to react.
Yeah, something like this, which is totally out of the government's control in many ways. So it was a company linked to Microsoft. They did some sort of security update and it just downed systems across the world, not just in the UK, but everywhere. Importantly, in this country, airports were hit in July when everyone's trying to go on holiday. People couldn't get through security because their boarding passes weren't scanning. But I think one of the things that may worry the government more is the impact it had on GP surgeries and health services. So there was GPs in London today saying that they couldn't access patient records, people couldn't make appointments, and they warned that this is actually quite unsafe if something like this happens again. So I think that is something that government departments are going to be discussing over the next few months, and how they combat or put in place systems that will counteract this if it happens again.
And as we speak, it appears that the impact of this is going to be limited, much to the government's relief. They didn't have to, in the end, to have an emergency COBRA meeting, which was mooted on Friday morning, a crash session of ministers trying to thrash out a crisis response. But more generally, it's really a reminder in a week that we saw the first preliminary report from the COVID inquiry come out, that governments can come in with all the best intentions and all the best laid plans, but it's always those events that come from nowhere that threaten to blow you off course.
And certainly at the start of the week, or certainly earlier in the week, we've had a number of set-piece events. We had the King's Speech, where the government unveiled its legislative programme. But we can already see coming down the road a possible major revolt by Labour MPs. This is over the two-child benefit limit. Now, there are many, many MPs, Labour MPs, Lib Dem, SNP MPs, who strongly object to this restriction on benefits. And Keir Starmer has stuck to this Tory policy as he sought to get into government and as he wanted to show that he can be trusted with the public finances. But I think he's come under a lot of pressure to give ground here.
Yeah, there's certainly a bit of a rebellion going on from more left-wing backbench Labour MPs, as well as the Greens, these independent MPs they've got now. So he will be under pressure for this. But I think the problem with the two-child benefit cap is lifting it and, saying to people, you'll still get the benefits if you have 3, 4, 5 children. They've done polling on it and it polls badly with the general public. So I think there is an unwillingness perhaps in a government that is trying to show that it's very fiscally responsible in a time where public finances are extremely stretched. There will be an unwillingness to be like, yes, let's spend all this money on children.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one, isn't it? On the one hand, we've got the first sort of Labour centre-left government in over 14 years. Why not do this? It would please not just left-wingers, people like former Prime Minister Gordon Brown, who's by no means a raging left-winger, but he's been front and centre of this campaign to help end child poverty. But it's really becoming a sort of litmus test of intent You know, they campaigned on this message of discipline and rigour, regardless of how much room for manoeuvre they have in Parliament. They really don't want to be blown off course already on some of those key promises.
And certainly another issue where the government are sticking very much to the line of the previous Tory administrations is on Ukraine. If anything, they would want to adopt a tougher approach towards giving steadfast support to Kyiv against Vladimir Putin's war. And Keir Starmer hosted a summit of European leaders at Blenheim, and he actually looked quite in place. Kind of lot of new prime ministers at the start. You think, do they really fit into this role or not? Certainly, David Cameron to start with, he looked very young, and Tony Blair as well. He looked very young as well when he started. But Keir Starmer, maybe because he's older, maybe because actually he's run an organisation, the Crown Prosecution Service previously, he seems to be quite in his natural environment doing what he's done so far.
Yes, he's certainly been very lucky in a sense so far, inheriting this calendar of events from Rishi Sunak that has thrown him straight into a NATO summit in Washington, straight into the European summit at Blenheim Palace. But luck only takes you so far. You've also got to look the part, sound the part. And yes, you're right that he's got age and experience behind him. But even then, you know, Gordon Brown sort of spent a very long time preparing for office, and he sort of struggled a little bit, didn't he, to acclimatise to the role of Prime Minister, and arguably never quite made it. So far so good, I would say, for Starmer.
Yeah, he's definitely had a lot of opportunities to show that he is a statesman. I mean, one of the criticisms of Keir Starmer when he was on the campaign trail was that he wasn't very prime ministerial. He wasn't like great at the debates, perhaps. But yeah, first couple of weeks, NATO summit, big meeting of European leaders at Blenheim, Zelensky in Parliament, big sort of King's speech. It's been it's been a good couple of weeks for him, hasn't it?
And it's been really striking on Ukraine, just briefly, that Zelensky was invited to attend cabinet on Friday morning, which is not something that's happened before. Labour, Starmer are very much doubling down on that support.
And this is actually coming at a very crucial moment in terms of the Ukraine war, because if you look across the Atlantic, there you've got Donald Trump and his running mate JD Vance. They're making sounds like they want to withdraw support from Kyiv and push Ukraine towards a negotiating table with Russia, which certainly at this stage would mean Ukraine conceding territory to Putin. And certainly there's a view in European nations that it's going to potentially be a very, very difficult time ahead in terms of foreign policy if Trump gets back in.
Yes, and that the question of Trump getting back in with JD Vance by his side is becoming more acute than ever, given the state of play with Joe Biden. But you're right that this is something that the Europeans are really having to get their heads around. Where are we going to go with this if, given that the vice presidential pick, JD Vance, is very much an isolationist on this front, sees no need to extend any more US aid to Ukraine, and Donald Trump, for his part, who somehow says magically he'll solve everything with one phone call. He's yet to spell out what he would say on that phone call and even with whom it would be. But hey, that's Trump for you. The point is, we're entering a very uncertain time here.
Right, let's go to a quick ad break.
Coming up, from a shooting to a big carnival in Milwaukee, it's been a week of upheaval in US politics.
Welcome back to the second part of the Standards Political Podcast. And while we're getting more and more stability in Britain, it's very much the opposite across the Atlantic in America, where all sorts of things seem to be happening.
Yeah, just when you thought that Keir Starmer was bringing back a measure of calm to the political scene, the Americans are there to remind us that everything is very much still to play for, and there's many more episodes of that particular drama to come. We saw a week ago a potentially election-changing moment when Donald Trump was nearly assassinated at a rally in Pennsylvania. He then went on to the Republican convention, which we discussed in the first part there, chose JD Vance as his running mate, and as of the last few hours on Thursday night, he's given what he claimed would be a message of healing and unity in light of the assassination in the speech accepting the nomination.
Yeah, but what was really interesting about that is that He went out to give a message of unity and said, I want to govern for the whole of America. And that lasted the best part of half an hour before he was piling into Biden and Nancy Pelosi again, and immigration, making all sorts of fanciful, untrue claims about immigration and how he's there to save democracy.
Yeah. I think it's quite striking that at the King's speech earlier this week, you had, Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer laughing and joking together in the Commons, sort of shaking hands. And, while they'd been political rivals, there was very much an idea like, you've won, well done. You cannot imagine that with Trump, can you? I mean, his sort of message of unity was the Democrats should drop all opposition to me, drop the criminal cases, and let me get on with what I want to do, basically.
And there was a message also about populism in Keir's speech, which was that really kind of cut through, I thought.
Keir Starmer warned against being tempted by the snake oil charm of populism. Now, in his immediate focus with that remark, you would think he's thinking about people like Liz Truss, who was very much in the frame of the King's speech as a warning of where Labour will refuse to go back to, that sort of reckless economic policy. But equally, as we're seeing in America, various merchants of snake oil charm are selling their wares to a large number of people.
And with J.D. Vance being his running mate, this is quite interesting because he took a cheap jibe at Britain, suggesting that Britain would be the first Islamist nuclear power, which is clearly utter rubbish. Yet at the same time, the new Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, and J.D. Vance seem to be building quite a relationship, which shows you very much that governments, if you're a British government, you've got to deal with various governments around the world, and some you'll get on with because you want to, others you get on with because you have to, basically.
Yeah, you have to take a lot of these comments with a large grain of salt. J.D. Vance, in that particular context, was speaking to a very right-wing American conservative audience and was sort of making a point for a cheap gag, basically. David Lammy has tried to rise above it, and he himself, the Foreign Secretary, has worked very, very hard, I think, to build bridges with people who are really not his natural allies here. He himself, what did he call Trump? A tyrant in a toupee, a Nazi sympathising sociopath. He's been on a bit of a journey there, and he says he recognises that, well, I'm Foreign Secretary now. I've got to represent my country, my government, and reach out to whoever it takes to build those alliances. And I think actually what's interesting is that when you look at the reception he's got in Washington, the one thing that Trump really likes is people coming up to him and courting him. He doesn't really care that much about where you're coming from. He can be bezies with Kim Jong-un here, It's about personal relationships there as much as anything else.
On that note, it was interesting, another bloke popped up at the Republican National Convention, one Nigel Farage.
Yes, Clacton's new MP.
Which exactly, the big question is, what was he doing there?
Well, not that his constituents in Clacton are seeing much of him, right?
No, exactly. I think, he skipped out on the King's speech, I think, to fly to America. And
I think he was there possibly for the King's speech, but not for the debate afterwards.
Yeah, missed all the debate, straight to America. And he was very sort of cagey about why he was there. He was sort of like, he was asked, did Donald Trump, as your friend, invite you? And he said, well, Donald Trump is my friend. His team suggested I should be here. Like, what do you mean his team suggested you should be there? It was very, very strange. I don't know what the people of Clacton would think about that, their new MP just sort of skipping out straight away to get to the US, but...
And certainly, while the focus has been on Donald Trump, the question mark is hanging over Joe Biden very much.
Yes.
We're entering a very fraught period. As we record, things might change quite quickly, but as we record, he's still just about hanging in there. However, it's coming a few hours after he was diagnosed with COVID. He suddenly hunkered down at his house in Delaware, isolating, very few people there, close family and trusted aides only. And beyond that, a bubble, there's a rising crescendo of voices now joined, we think, by Barack Obama, as well as Nancy Pelosi and other very influential figures in the Democratic camp, saying enough's enough here. Ever since that disastrous debate performance that Joe Biden put in against Donald Trump a few weeks ago, the polls have just been hemorrhaging. Donors are turning away now, and once the money dries up in US politics, it's really curtains.
And for the Republicans, they're obviously enjoying this gleefully, seeing the turmoils in the Democratic Party. But there should be a note of caution for them, because if Joe Biden pulls out, put in a younger candidate, whoever it is, suddenly Donald Trump is the old man. Is he the future? He probably doesn't look like the future. So kind of if you're a floating voter looking to try and make a better life for yourself in America, do you really go back to the old Trump?
No, exactly. And the key point, one key point to bear in mind here is that for all the panic we're seeing on the Democratic side, they are still polling under Biden at 47-48% nationally, and thereabouts. They're competitive in the battleground states where the election will be decided. So it wouldn't take much of a swing either way to really get them back in contention under the right person.
Yeah, there are still definitely a lot of never Trumps out there, aren't there, who will vote for anyone apart from him. And I think a lot of people are just thinking, though, the Democrats cannot just rely on that. They can't just rely on an anti-Trump vote in November. They've got to have a candidate that at least can stand up in a debate and represent the US on the world stage.
And that's a week's a long time in Westminster.
For all the latest news, head to standard.co.uk or pick up a newspaper.
The Standard podcast will be back tomorrow at 4 p.m.
Have a great weekend.